This is called Trains Passing. It's about the history of CentraLit. You can hear the trains from anywhere within the boundaries of my hometown. You can hear them from the east where the apple orchards grow. You can hear them from Southtown where smoke of factory chimneys once rose to the sky. You can hear them from your bed at night. You can hear them in the small hours when you lie sleepless, the whistle, the rumbling, and shifting sounds. And I can remember listening to them from my classroom when I was a child. I turned my head toward the window and I'd be gone. They called to me then, and they call to me now. The song of yesterday, the siren song. The railroad gave birth to the town in 1853. It was the town's main industry in those days, along with the fruit orchards. Our town is 60 miles east of St. Louis, is one of 3 Illinois cities with portions in 4 counties. There are no hills to speak of. But there is another geography, the geography of time. And there are things that people remember. They remember the whistle-stop tours of men who ran for high office, and how the train stopped and men came out and spoke to the crowds at the intersection of Oak and Broadway. Lincoln was here. He stopped at the State Fair in 1858 on his way home from his debate at Jonesboro. There are other memories, too, the ones that people don't talk about. But I've heard how Emmett Till passed through our town in the city of New Orleans on his way to his dark destiny in the Mississippi. It is 403 miles from our town to death along the Tallahatchie River. I remember the old station with its marble halls and its echoing footfalls. I remember how the agent would call a departure and how the sound was like something mumbled in a dream. Yes, the trains called to me. There was both a loveliness and a loneliness in the sound of their whistles. And in September, I watch as birds gather on wires and boughs and rooftops. I wonder if this is what they feel as they ready themselves for migration. I wonder if something inherent, something irresistible, something older than time within them and within me calls to us saying, come. The sound of the trains passing makes me think of woods and fields and farms. It makes me think of small towns and courthouse squares and shining cities. It makes me think of oceans and mountains and new lands. It makes me wonder if, at the end of my next journey, I might discover who I am, or was, or might have been. This is called Epiphanies, Part 4. Thank you. Jessie told me once there are many kinds of epiphanies. The first kiss, leaving home, marriage, the birth of a child. She said that for some an epiphany may be something felt, such as enlightenment, or something seen, such as crossing the ocean, stepping foot for the first time in a new land. Death was my first epiphany, the darkest, the strangest. To return to the place where I was born, that I had known as a child, is for me to return to a land of memory. Lost moments come back to me. The past and all of its ghosts and shadows are all around me and seem to take unto themselves a mythic quality. Here were formed those first impressions, the first, the deepest, the ones that more than any other made me who I am. The streets are haunted and I wander down them, remembering all that is gone, remembering my father and mother, remembering Jimmy. I drive past the houses that I knew, our house on Jonquil, and that red brick house on the highway, just as you leave town, Jimmy's house, and farther on the lake. When Jimmy died, something gold went out in the mornings. He was my first cousin. He was 24 years of age and just home for 4 years in the Navy. Jimmy possessed the gift of entering into a child's world. He was a big man, but his voice was gentle. He would sit and talk to me as if there were only he and I in the house. He knew the card games that I could play, the songs that I could sing. Sometimes he would bring his guitar and play along. He would tell me in words that a child could understand about the places that he had been, the things that he had seen, about the far horizons, about the sky and water. He was like my friend and my brother. I was 6 years old when Jimmy died. The last time that I passed through town, something made me think of Jimmy's grave. I had never seen it since his burial all those years ago. I followed the winding road that I remembered, and I stopped twice to ask directions. But at last I found it. It was in a small country cemetery, and as I walked down the road looking for his marker, the names on the stones were familiar ones. Gamble, Trout, Gambetta, Holt. I remember the names, but I'd forgotten most of the faces. And I walked along the row of stone angels and faded flowers until I found the marker, Jimmy's marker. It stood at the end of the road next to an oak tree. It was a gray stone shaped like an open book. I knelt and pushed away the tall grass and read his name, and the pages of the book turned back. His name had been James, but he had been young in the day when, if you were a young man, your name was William, or Robert, or James. Then you were Billy, or Bob, or Jimmy, even into adulthood. And if you were an old man who gathered in the places where old men went to dream and to remember, we lingered in barber shops in cold weather, and in warm we sat on front porches and leaned on backyard fences. And when we were tired of politics and told to listen to all the old stories of death and dying, of how and when and why this one and that one had met their ends, stories that you knew by heart. And so on those rare occasions when I came home and when the old men heard that my name was Endicott, that Endicott, the Endicott his father had worked in the mine. the one whose mother had been a dentist, who had been Jimmy's aunt, and they told me what they knew. They told me what they remembered, what they had never ceased remembering. They told me the story that had only grown more vivid to them as the years had passed, and the world ends had closed in upon them. They had talked about it among themselves many times, and always it had drawn them like moths to a flame. And the awe that had inspired them, no matter how many times they had heard it, no matter how many times they had encountered death, had matched my own on that Sunday morning when my mother set me on a chair at the kitchen table. And as the old man talked, the colors washed back to that Marion County. And this is what happened. My mother worked as a maid in a local hotel. And my father had been laid off from the mine when there was talk of a layoff. She would take on extra work cleaning houses. On the afternoon that Jimmy died, she was to clean the house and one of the summer people on the lake. It was a Saturday, and she had taken me with her. I can still remember the winding country road that led to his house, the woods whose trees had not yet budded, and now and then glimpses of the lake. And while she worked, I stood at the back window, looked towards the water, and I could see not the lake, not Jimmy, but the backs of men and boys congregated on the shore. I opened the back door and stepped out into the wide porch that looked towards the lake. Although I could not make out the words, I could hear voices. I knew that something was happening, but I didn't know what it meant. I could hear raised voices with their tones of what I now recognize as anguish and pity and horror. It was cold for April. The wind had swung around and was blowing out of the north, and there were white horses upon the water. There was talk of snow by the next morning. There were no other boats on the water that day, only Jimmy's white runabout. The boats on the shore belonged to the summer people and were locked and chained. Bud Ferris and some of his roughnecks were working a sputter rig on the north side of the lake. And there were some men and boys on the shore clearing brush and picking up trash and making whatever repairs were necessary to the docks along the shore. Along with coal and oil, the summer people were the lifeblood of the local economy. And so the townspeople were preparing for the tourist season when hopefully the boaters and swimmers and picnickers would come in and would rent cabins and buy lunch at Archie's Cafe once it opened in the spring. Jimmy had taken Frank Phillips for a ride around the lake. He let Frank out on the dock at about 3:30 because Frank had some kind of business in town at 5. And Jimmy told Frank that he would take one more spin around the lake. No one knew for certain how it happened or why it happened, the accident. Later there were disagreements. Some said that he had been going too fast and had made a sharp turn toward the point and had been thrown out of the boat. But Bud said no. Jimmy had been in the stern working on the motor and suddenly it started. He had been flipped over the back end. All anyone knew for certain was that one moment he was in the boat, the next he was in the water. All they knew was that the boat's motor was still running and the boat was circling, and that Jimmy was thrashing in the cold water and calling for help. He was a good swimmer, but the water was cold and his muscles must have cramped, they said. And he crowded the shore, the men and boys, anguished, wringing their hands, wanting to save him, wanting to do something, but knowing that there was nothing that they could do, turning to one another as if a neighbor might have an answer. They stood on the shore and shouted and wept. Some of them raised their hands as if in supplication. Some of them pulled at the chains that tied the other boats to the shore as if they could break them. And years later, they still remember the white boat circling, and how Jimmy seemed to float there for minutes. Almost it must seem like a eternity to the men and the boys on the shore and to Jimmy. And then he went under. George Walton, the lake caretaker, had driven his workshop, trying to call the fire department on his radio telephone. There was no answer. He drove up the county road looking for someone home in one of the summer houses, knowing only too surely that would be too late. The hours passed and evening came. The fire department had put 2 boats on the water, civil defense first, right for the nighttime recovery operations. The Salvation Army brought coffee and sandwiches. It was after midnight when they found it. Archie Folk, the man who owned Archie's Cafe, said that there were still people on the shore, the recovery people and townspeople who come to watch and wait. They said that when they brought Jimmy up, it was as quiet as prayer time at church, that you could have heard a pin drop. He said that the wind had stopped and the water had grown calm, as if they too were watching and waiting. The visitation and funeral were at a small church called Young Heirs Chapel, which had been built by a family that had grown wealthy during the oil boom in the 40s. I remember only the visitation. It was the first time that I had seen a dead body. It was the body of someone I had known, someone I had loved. I was filled with a young child's fascination with death, which is one part sorrow, one part curiosity, and one part wonder. Someone, I don't remember who, perhaps one of the neighbors, had whispered in my ear and told me, if you kiss the dead, you won't miss them so much. But I hadn't done that. Couldn't. We forget how much children understand what they know. On the day that Jimmy died, something had changed for me. Something as profound as the rotation of the earth around the sun, or the law of gravity, or the cycle of the seasons. There were no words for this change, no words that I possessed, no words for the question for which, in any case, there could have been no answers. But if I had known the words, this is what I might have asked. If Jimmy and his strength could die, if Jimmy and his youth could be taken from us, who could last and what could last. And I wondered too, if the white boat came circling, who would save us. Yeah. Got one more. It's called Jackie's Place. Sometimes I pass by the dusty vacant windows of what had once been Jackie's Place, a place that I knew well when I was 21. I pass by the window and look inside. The walnut bar is still there, though the tables and booths have been removed. I remember the table by the window where we used to sit on Friday nights, Saturday mornings really, Eddie and Jean and I. I remember where we sat when we stopped after work on days when I was young. I think of those hours that I spent there when the three of us were young men. And then it all comes back to me. Yes, it all comes back to me what it was to be young. I think of those early winter mornings that it seemed that I would belong forever to that fellowship and to that place. There was nothing special to look at Jackie's Place. There was a narrow bar that stood downtown sandwiched between the newsstand and the cigar store. But during those hours when the three of us were there, it seemed marvelous. I remember the color of the light, and even after all these years, the songs that played on the jukebox. It all comes again, in memory of that deep sense of belonging I felt when I sat with my friends during those small, still hours after midnight, while the wind shook the walls and blew the snow past the window glass along the silent streets. I think it was the closest to happiness that I've ever come. That place, and at that time, I felt complete. In those fleeting hours, it was as if nothing that could separate the three of us. And there was something else, something more. It was as if there were no clocks at all, no time, no death. We were immortal, we would be young forever. It wasn't that I ever spoke of these things to the others, but the sense of belonging and fellowship that I felt there among them. Maybe I was afraid that to speak of it was to break some kind of spell that would end the magic that I felt surrounding us. Maybe I felt that I would not be understood and that this understanding would come between the three of us. Or maybe there were just no words. And yet it all seemed true, and I felt these things with a surety that felt like faith, that felt like knowing. There was a surety that I knew in no other place, not at the workplace from which we had come, not at home, not in the other places that I frequented in my spare time in those days. When I was not at Jackie's Place, I felt a sense of time passing, that turning of seasons, that clockwork of the ages. When I was not here, I felt some vague notion of all else being anywhere but for the earth. I felt a terrible restlessness and wondered if that feeling was like the hunger for migration that sends the birds south each year at the cusp of winter. But while we were at Jackie's Place, everything was different. In Jackie's Place, we were all together. In Jackie's Place, we talked about what we would do when we had found our places in the world. And sometimes on those nights, as the wind blew, the snow hurried by, and the hands of the clock moved past midnight, we spoke of other things. Sometimes for all of us, the door opens somewhere. Those things that reside deeply within us, and that we never knew were there come out. And so it was that it came to us, that poetry that arrives at midnight and that disappears at dawn. And then we spoke of dreams and longings, and of those things that we were sure would come to us that were almost ours. And in those shining moments as the town slept, we found words for those things that cannot be spoken of in the daylight. And then as the clock on the wall near closing time, we would speak about friendships. We would swear that wherever we might be, we would return once a year. We would come back to Jackie's Place and renew our fellowship, perhaps on winter mornings after midnight. Yes, we would come back again. We would always come again. It never occurred to me that none of it was real. It never occurred to me that nothing can last and that there are paths that can never be found. I would never have believed those things, not then. Not when I was 21, not at Jackie's Place. It would have been a lie. It would have been a sacrilege, a blasphemy. By the end of the new year, all of it was gone. In April, Eddie joined the Air Force, and by October, Gene had moved to California. I heard later had found a job as a truck driver. It was the last that I knew of either of them. But even now, something of the dreamer remains in me, I suppose, for I have thought of those days many times through the years. I have thought of the three of us as we once were brothers, trading dreams by window full of darkness, while the wind hurried the snow along the hushed streets. And this I wondered. I wondered what they are and where they go, those things we feel but cannot touch or see. Are they borne away on the wind like the snow that fell along the street all those years ago? Will they reappear one day on the shore where lost things are remembered? And I wondered what it was that I felt at Jackie's Place all those years ago. What was it that made it seem like magic? Was it the time and place? Was it our youth and the faith that we would live forever, that all was about to come to us? Was it the warmth of brotherly love and that golden light that closed us in the midst of storm and darkness? Each time that I passed by the empty window, I wondered about these things. But now I think that I know. I think that the magic lay in those shining hours that briefly stood between us and the truth that was even hid in our hearts. I think it was those moments that let us believe that there is no loss, no death, no darkness in silent streets.